4 men conquered more of the world than anyone else in history. They broke armies, collapsed kingdoms, and reshaped maps. From Alexander the Great and Julius Caesar to Genghis Khan and Attila the Hun, each believed conquest itself was proof of destiny. This is the story of how each of them fell, and how conquest itself became the weapon that destroyed them. But they didn't fall because they lacked power. They fell because they never learned how to stop. And once conquest becomes your identity, the most dangerous moment isn't defeat. It's the moment there's nothing left to take. It starts with the same lie every time. One victory proves you're chosen. For Alexander, that lie begins the moment Persia starts collapsing. Because the Persian Empire wasn't just another rival, it was the superpower of the known world, and he tears through it with an army that moves faster than anyone thinks possible. Each battle confirms the same lesson. Boldness works, momentum works, and hesitation is weakness. Caesar learns the same lesson in a different language. He doesn't just win battles, he wins men. His victories in Gaul make him rich and famous, but the real prize is loyalty. Legions that begin to see Caesar as their future, not Rome. That's when power stops being political and becomes physical. Genghis Khan's first hit comes from unifying tribes that should never have united. He builds a structure that rewards merit, punishes betrayal, and turns scattered riders into a coordinated weapon. Once that system works once, it becomes addictive. Because now conquest isn't a gamble, it's a process. And Attila doesn't need a centuries-old state or a written ideology. He needs fear. Roman cities empty at rumors. Tribute arrives before his armies do. He learns what every conqueror dreams of. You can win without fighting if the enemy's imagination is working for you. Different eras. Same chemical reaction. Victory rewires the brain. The world starts to feel like something you can force to obey. Then the conqueror evolves, because conquest is never content with what it already took. It demands escalation. More land, more control, more certainty. Alexander upgrades speed into scale. He's no longer taking cities. He's absorbing civilizations. Egypt, Mesopotamia, Persia, Central Asia, founding new cities, naming them after himself. Pushing east as if the horizon is an insult. Caesar upgrades conquest into politics. Winning abroad isn't enough. The real prize is deciding what Rome itself will be. His army follows him not because he's lawful, but because he's useful. And once an army becomes personally loyal, the state becomes optional. Genghis upgrades conquest into doctrine. He's not just winning battles. He's designing a machine that can repeat victory. Mongol cavalry strikes at speed, coordinates across huge distances, and uses terror deliberately. Because terror doesn't just kill enemies, it changes the choices of people who haven't fought yet. And here's the infrastructure piece that made that scale possible. The Mongols built a relay network of stations, roughly a day's ride apart, so couriers could swap horses and keep moving. Marco Polo described stations about 25 miles apart, and claimed a rider could carry messages as far as 300 miles in a day. Attila upgrades fear into extraction. He doesn't need permanent occupation, because tribute is control in another form. At his peak, the Eastern Roman Empire is paying 2,100 Roman pounds of gold each year, literally bleeding the treasury to avoid the cost of resisting him. Here's the trap. Escalation feels like strength, but escalation always creates a new enemy. Your own system. Because the bigger the conquest gets, the more your empire depends on your presence, your momentum, and your ability to keep moving. This is where the pattern tightens. At some point, the empire stops being the reward and becomes the problem. The conqueror turns inward, not to rest, but to enforce movement. Alexander reaches India and meets the first limit that can't be slain: exhaustion. He wins a brutal battle against Porus, but across the river waits another vast force while his own men are worn down and far from home. And when those men refuse to go further, Alexander is forced to accept something humiliating. Even he cannot march alone. Later, when dissent flares again at Opus, he answers it not as a companion of soldiers, but as an absolute ruler. executing ringleaders to silence the message that he can be resisted. Caesar turns inward too, but politically. The moment he crosses the Rubicon with his army, it isn't just a military move. It's a declaration that the state no longer controls the general. His 10th Legion follows him with personal loyalty. Debts paid, rewards guaranteed. And Caesar deepens that bond by raising soldier pay. Later sources commonly credit him with doubling legionary pay to about 225 denarii per year. It's the perfect recipe for a civil war, an army that sees the commander as its future. Genghis confronts a different limit: scale. As the empire expands, chaos becomes a threat from within. So he responds with discipline, harsh law, enforced order, and a code that chroniclers describe as strict enough that valuables could travel safely across vast distances. Violence builds the empire, but discipline prevents it from collapsing immediately under its own weight. Attila's limit is the most fragile of all. His empire is fear with a heartbeat. It has no institutional spine, no succession strong enough to replace the center, which means everything depends on Attila continuing to exist as the source of fear, and continuing to move. The moment he stops, even briefly, the question forms in everyone's mind: what happens when he's gone? By this stage, none of them are conquering to win. They're conquering to avoid the consequences of stopping. And now the ending is unavoidable, not because enemies grew stronger, but because conquest created a system that cannot rest. So how does an appetite like that end? Alexander reaches Babylon in 323 BC at the height of his power. After days of heavy drinking, he falls violently ill, fever, pain, and a gradual loss of movement. Within days, he can no longer speak. Physicians declare him dead. Yet ancient sources record that his body showed no immediate signs of decay, an unusual detail that later writers interpreted as divine. Modern scholars suggest a more troubling possibility: paralysis or neurological failure that left him conscious but unresponsive. As Alexander lies silent, his generals ask who should inherit the empire. His final answer, "to the strongest," turns his empire into a battlefield. Alexander dies, and almost immediately, his generals begin fighting one another. The empire collapses because nothing was built to function without him. By 44 BC, Caesar has defeated all rivals and accepted the title dictator for life. The Roman Republic has no legal way to restrain him. On the Ides of March, Caesar enters the Senate unarmed. The senators around him, many of them former allies, attack and kill him. Ancient accounts differ on his final words, but all agree on the reason for his death. Caesar is killed not because he failed, but because his power left no room for coexistence. His death does not save the Republic. It accelerates its collapse. Genghis Khan dies in 1227 while his empire is still expanding. The exact cause of death is unknown, illness or injury, but the response is deliberate. His death is kept secret. His burial is concealed. The Mongol armies continued their campaign without pause. Unlike the others, Genghis built a system that survived him. But even that system eventually fractures as successors struggle to command the same authority. His empire lasts longer, but it is not permanent. Attila's empire depends almost entirely on fear. In 453 AD, he dies suddenly, reportedly after heavy drinking on his wedding night. There is no succession capable of replacing him. Within months, the Hunnic Confederation collapses. Without Attila, there is nothing holding it together. His empire does not fall in battle. It disappears. All four men die differently, but none of them are defeated by stronger enemies. They fall because conquest creates systems that cannot stop, and because no system built on constant movement can survive once the man driving it is gone. No conqueror ever reaches an end, only the moment where he can no longer continue.